Howdy folks, Doc here with Last Best Tool, and today we're going to talk about axes and hatchets. And one of the things to keep in mind about the difference in hatchets and axes is that it's a pretty basic tool, so there's just kind of maybe four main things to look at when you're considering, say, in this case, a hatchet. This is the classic Estwing with the leather washer handle. Kind of an industry standard of measurement. You know, lots of people have them, lots of people grew up with them. And then this is what things are often measured against, both up and down. And in the case of a hatchet, you've got basically the overall length of the hatchet. You've got the head size, which is both in physical size and in weight. You've got the materials that it's made from, and you've got the profile. In this case, this is a fairly narrow profile, and those are the main things to look at because it gives you an idea of what the axe feels like in use, the performance, what it's good for. Some minor things might be the finish work and the grind of the bit here, how sharp it is, the angle, etc., the type of steel that they used, and just the overall quality, the finish work, how it feels in your hand, especially a bare hand, not a gloved hand. Probably the leader of the axes and the hatchets that most people kind of consider the general availability of, probably the leader is Gransfors Bruk. And this is out of Sweden. It's a handmade axe. There are a handful of different Bruks that are out of Sweden. There are much higher level, higher priced axes and hatchets available. But at that rarefied air of race axes and competitive axes and custom handmade axes, you can't just jump on Amazon or do a Google search and find a dealer and buy one. They're a little more exclusive, and they're so exceedingly rare in terms of whether or not you'll encounter one in the wild, that we're going to stop it at the Gransfors Bruks. This is a high-performance tool, handmade in Sweden. There is an actual initialed axe smith that created this, and there are plenty of features we can look at this level that tell us, about the performance of this axe or this hatchet. This is the wildlife hatchet, probably their #1 seller, real common. However, what you're looking at is, say, a $40 axe on Amazon. Maybe these are 50, I don't know. Close. It was 40 last time I checked, versus something that's in the $140 realm. So is there a $100 difference between these two? And the answer is yes, or the answer is no. It kind of depends on who you are, what your expectations are, and what you appreciate. So let's start looking at a few of the features. The handle length is a good starting point, with the handle material being something that is important to consider. I'm going to eliminate these out of our pile pretty quick. This is a Hart, and this particular one probably comes closest to this Estwing here in terms of kind of profile. It's got a solid steel shaft all the way down through this rubberized handle. This is solid steel all the way down to the finishing of this butt cap on this leather washered handle. Similar profile. These are a little narrow for my taste. The Hart's a little better than the Estwing. That's a really kind of a shallow tip on it, and that creates some problems of getting stuck in the wood, not splitting it, not pushing it apart. We're going to talk about that a lot because that's kind of critical in the use of the axe. Overall durability, really good. I have bent these. So this does... It deforms rather than breaks. That could be a good thing, but it also, I think, deforms a little bit easier. Will probably last a much longer time than a standard wood handle. But one of the problems is it puts so much of the weight into the handle. So, you know, if you're just hitting a couple of things, so sometimes that's all people do, you know, they just knock a couple branches off a piece of firewood and throw it in the fire and call it good. But just to move that much mass back and forth takes a lot of energy, and you really start to feel it, especially if it's a lower performing bit. And this one is. I mean, it's dull. Out of the factory, you might think, well, it's sharper than a chisel maybe, or a nickel. But it's really not that great a steel. And then when you use the same steel in the handle, especially if it's not tempered differently, can really cause a lot of shock. So what do? You try to cover up that handle with some shock absorbing material. In this case, an old standard was leather. It is a neat material. I mean, you're talking cowhide in rings that are stuck onto this shaft through this tang. So it does have a pretty good feel. Doesn't transfer heat near as bad as some of the others if you're using them in cold weather with bare hands. But it's still a lot of weight. I mean, this thing, the majority of the weight obviously is in the head, but if you look at the balance point on this thing, right about here somewhere, you know, you're moving a lot of handle mass, and that can be a problem. However, it is an inexpensive way of building a high-quality axe. The quality control at Estwing is excellent. They're known for making these striking tools, and definitely something that they excel in. And just, it's been around. It's proven itself. You know, people pull them out from under, like me, under car seats, truck seats, and they're all rusty, and we polish them back up and put a new edge on them, and, you know, put some sealant on the handle again and go to work. You can even replace that handle if you need to. But for performance, for actually enjoying the use of the tool, the handmade Swedish axes are phenomenal. They just make you want to go out and cut things. So here are two. This one's like $140 again, something like that. And here's a Gerber, and this Gerber is actually made by Fiskers. It's a German company. They have really dialed in their way of making these plastic handled hatchets with a decent but highly machined. This was made by a robot. There's no doubt in my mind the way it's cut off. I mean, the machining, the tool marks on the bottom and top are aggressive, and I mean, there's just no finish work here whatsoever, but this is finished beautifully. You can see the tool marks kind of across the top here that ground this, so that was actually total machine grinding. Plastic handle with this wraparound. It's pretty durable, but I have broken these. Fiskers has an excellent warranty. They're kind of standard as this guy here. It actually is their X7 hatchet. It's a hollow handle, you know, up to about here. This thing really, it does perform, I think, above its pay grade. Nice, comes factory sharp. This one is finished a lot better than this Gerber. You can kind of see that in the grinding there. That's where humans and time take a bite out of the inexpensiveness, start to raise the price. But this is a finish axe. Fiskers has obviously done wonders with a lot of polymer and plastic handles, but these can shatter. But it's a good performance axe, pretty simple. People, you know, design their own stuff to put in their handles because they've got a big open space there. And it does transfer a lot of the mass right up the front, which is where you want it. Another thing is this particular sheath that came with this guy. Well, actually it didn't come with this guy immediately. I got a little, I call them blade bikinis, just a tiny little cover that came over this when I picked this up at Home Depot. And then I contacted Fiskers and said, hey, I didn't get one of these kind of handles, or one of these kind of blade covers, excuse me, for this, and they sent me one. So I'd heard that they would do that, provide me an actual sheath. But anyway, back to what we're talking about. So what do you get? Well, one thing, if you notice the blade profiles, this is a pretty stout wedge. And normally that would be okay, except in this case it's got a pretty small handle. This does a lot of spreading of the wood, which can be really good. However, the handle is so short that you're not really striking it at a very high speed or with a lot of force. This, on the other hand, has a nice profile to dig in and then spread. And this particular handle is actually the exact same, bit, excuse me, the axe cutting part is exactly the same as what's on their classic wilderness or wildlife hatchet. So these two are the same, with the only difference being the handle length and profile. So this might be a smaller handle or a smaller bit on a longer handle. This is maybe a bigger bit on a shorter handle, however you want to look at it, but they do both perform differently. So on this one, I'm getting a much heavier striking piece on a shorter lever arm. And this one to me has just balanced out just about perfect for a lot of things. So it's up to me to decide which one I carry. This comes down, if you look at this, is a much stouter handle right in here. It's pretty beefy. It's designed for a lot of kind of smaller chores being used in a lot of different ways, that you might find this longer handle here a little bit in the way. And what are you carrying it in? I could easily put this in a very small pack, whereas this is going to take something a little bit larger. And then if I go to this size, why don't I make, a bigger jump? Or if I'm going this size, you could ask the same question, why don't I go to something smaller? And this here is the Gransfors Bruk smallest mini hatchet. So you can see, that they've really scaled this down in terms of the bit size. However, they also put a smaller handle on it, so it's for both smaller tasks, but also this is in that gray area between what's the difference between a hatchet and a knife. And I've gutted fish with this. It behaves quite well. It's razor sharp, shaving sharp, cuts right through paper, but I can use this as a knife. However, it's about I brought out a tape measure here. We're looking at approximately a 2.5 inch blade. This, by the way, is the Milwaukee wide blade. I got this deliberately, brought it out deliberately to show you some of the measurements here because it's very easy to read in both directions. Anyway, so this is a classic in terms of small hatchets, except it's way expensive. And the reason is if you're using those crude, huge hammer forges that the Gransfors Bruk uses in Sweden, it's hard to make these without messing them up. So they fail on a lot of the design, slamming them down. Things get off, they restart, they recycle the steel, and start again. So definitely something to think about, and just appreciation. These cost a lot because they're very hard to make. Again, a beautiful profile. This angle here is critical. A lot of smaller profile hatchets or things that look like hatchets, really, they don't work very well. These are some here. This is a CRKT. It's kind of a Tomahawk design. Very narrow right here. And the problem with that narrowness is it just sinks right down into wood and sticks. There is no lateral force applied as the blade is entering the wood. So it just kind of gets sucked right in. So the Tomahawk design, yeah, you can kind of trim wood, you can do some splitting, batoning, but it will get stuck. And that's the problem with these narrow ones. Estwing's Tomahawk, this particular one, I haven't figured out what on earth in modern times you could use this thing for. I heard some folks in Iraq were using them to break into barrels and puncture tires and, shatter things. But I obviously, you can see I haven't really used this, but I've used this end quite a bit. It's a very small bit, very heavy handle, interesting, fun to play with. You learn things. And then this was their hunting version, where they increased the size of the bit here. It's got kind of a hollowed cheek, which cuts some of the weight. And then this thing here is actually a knife edge that's used as maybe a gut hook or something, where you're yanking across, separating or cutting open an animal, or pulling out material, slicing material off. And you can hack a little bit with it. But for chopping wood, processing wood, this is just way too narrow. This is a problem. You start breaking into any kind of a round, and it just sticks, and then you have to pry it out. So these are not at all for that kind of work. So that's this and this. So let's go into some of the others. The Hart I'm going to get rid of. This is just really heavy. I mean, you almost want to use two hands like a hammer, a big hammer. Interesting, you know, they did spend some time doing some cutouts, but I really don't think this is as effective given its weight. And it's not a terribly expensive hatchet either. Comparable to the Estwing. Others, this is let me do this. This Stihl here is not quite as good as you'd think. One of the reasons that these, say Gransfors Bruk's costs more is because the angle of the grain of the handle, somebody took great pains in designing this handle. Very good wood, hickory, hardened, seasoned, oiled, and then the grain alignment when they cut and process this into a handle is pretty good. The grain alignment, you want to run this direction. You do not want it to run in this direction, and the closer you get to following the bit, the better. I've got a Milwaukee battery going out on me over there. Maybe I'll shut that off so it doesn't keep blinking. So what happens is it takes a lot more handles to get the good ones. This Stihl, which by the way is a German manufacturing on this particular hatchet, look at that. What you've got is nice parallel to the bit. On this is actually perpendicular. It's going this direction. And one way you can get away with that is you use a bigger handle so you have less returns. You know, look at the size of that difference there. This is already, you know, a softer wood anyway. But then you also can paint it. You know, cover it with paint. Then nobody will notice. Not they can tell. But for general use, the Stihls are quite good. This is probably about a $50 axe or hatchet. It's kind of their small forest one. This is their next size up in what is called a splitting hatchet. And if you notice, you know, it's the bits are similar in size right there. And these bits, you know, a little bit different angle, but it's the contrast here, where if you look at these guys, this is way not only thicker, but the steepness of the, if I can get this to focus, might be too close to my camera because the handle's long. This wedge shape just spreads out so fast. This is designed to split wood. It's a big heavy head if you're doing smaller, like delimbing, any kind of carving, making things. You know, it's way overkill for that. But compared to this, you can see there's a huge difference. And I love this thing for all kinds of different camp chores, especially splitting. This is just such a nice size. This one they got a little bit better, slight bit of an angle. Hilarious on this. It's not perfectly straight across. It's not 100% what you don't want. It's about 90% what you don't want. But it's still, you know, these are a little bit more money, but they're not. This one's branded with the German forge that made it. But I've had decent luck with these guys. You can ramp it up with Stihl. Also, they make a much beefier, I call this a forest battle axe. I mean, this is solid, thick steel right here in this overstrike collar. Just a beefy, huge blade. One thing you can do is look at, as the light hits this as an angle, you'll often see a line. In this case, it's right here. A lot of these, you can see it here. Looks like it's about right there. Is there one here? Yeah, this one's right up close, right near the edge, because it was done mostly by machine. But basically what that is a tempering. You want to temper this tip differently than the rest of the axe. And some people, in this case, the metal handles, they may even temper this differently. So they might have 2 or 3 different heat treating tempers on this kind of a hatchet. And that's because you need a different performance at the bit than you do for the overall handle. The overall head of the axe, and then the handle, as far as maybe a softer metal so it doesn't transfer the shock quite as much. On this one, it's pretty obvious where this is located. You can see it. And then if you look at the way they've installed this head, let me point it this way maybe, get some light on it. Not only is this pounded on like traditional axe heads, wedged on with wood, but then they also have this screw mechanism that drives into an additional mounting point. And then, of course, they've got the metal collar. This is overkill, massive, beefy piece right here of wood. And then on down the rest of the handle. And let's take a look at the grain here. Look at that. I call that Stihl's redemption. That is almost perfect all the way down. That is just beautiful. This is one of my favorites. I actually have a couple of these. This one I don't use much. But I use the other one, but I've had no trouble with it, whatever. It's just way heavy, but just bomb-proof for so many things. And it's got kind of a combination. They call this a professional forest axe. Kind of a combination bit here that does spread out quite rapidly here, but you have to be in about 3 inches into the wood before that happens. So with lighter strikes, you're getting the traditional axe hatchet performance, and then if you hit hard, you're going to move into the splitting axe and hatchet. So this is the splitting hatchet here. If you were to move up bigger, you start to get into the splitting axes, and then finally maybe they this is what a splitting maul looks like, and this is Gransfors Bruk's biggest or heaviest head that they make. But you can see here just how fast this goes into a wide spread. And that's because it's nothing but brute force to go laterally. It is not designed to go down deep into a piece of wood. It's supposed to spread it hard. And they've really beefed up the back end, so this can actually be used to strike wedges. Whereas, believe it or not, on most axes and hatchets, you're not really supposed to use this back end right here. For hard striking. They're not made for it. Anyway, so this is a nice one. This guy here, let me measure the handle here for you. All the way out, I've got about 31 inches in total length. This guy is just a beast. Again, solid steel overstrike collar that's been welded on, heavy handle. And then the handle on a lot of actual good splitting mauls is symmetrical. It's not directional, so you can strike from either way. If you're using the back of it to hit something like a wedge, it fits just perfectly in your hand. Uh-oh, I'm losing my other light. But then this one actually is designed, for proper holding in either direction. Some of the more directional ones work great in one, but not the other. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of others here. This is the Gransfors Bruk's outdoor hatchet. It's kind of a funny name since most of these are never used indoors, although some people do. If you've got a wood stove, you might be splitting things right by it. A little bit longer handle here. I'm going to compare this guy to the this wilderness hatchet. So we got our outdoor and our wilderness. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting, I've gone smaller here with Gransfors Bruk's. That means I've gone more expensive. I've added a steel collar cha-ching, more money. The handles, this one's just a little bit longer. Let's take a look at the profile. Really nice. It's really close. But a little bit off. It's not the end of the world. You know, perfect is hard to come by when you're dealing with natural materials. And then just the feel of this super sharp, super small design, both with a longer lever arm and a tiny head. So this thing is almost the opposite in theory of this one. This is a big head on a short handle. This is a small head on a long handle. Which is better? Well, that's where you need to get out and be doing stuff in order to figure out what it is that you need. This one, to me, is a great backpacking hatchet. I don't like using a quality knife. You know, like in this case, I might have, you know, this Falcon F1 Pro might be the knife that I have with me on an outdoor trip. That's you know, darn near twice the amount of blade. But if I'm putting this on a piece of wood and then banging on it with a stick, you know, this is a high performance, smaller cutting tool. And to use it for a crude wood processing job is not an appropriate use, I don't believe, of a quality knife. Instead, I would rather, you know, raise the pay on my axe or my hatchet and move this into some knife chores, which you can do if it comes shaving sharp, or if you can keep it shaving sharp. I'll do an axe sharpening video in a bit. But basically, once you've got a good edge on this, you've got a second knife, and you've got the ability to process some serious wood, depending on what your needs are. If you need to go to something bigger, well, then you can move up into what are called forest axes. And the forest axes look something like this. There are two sizes here. This one, let me measure these for you. So this guy here, I've got about 25 inches on that, and this one here about 19. Two common sizes. And what we've got are basically a large hatchet here, or a small axe. And then in this case, we might have a small axe. I think this is too big for a hatchet name, but it's easy, it's lighter, it's one you can carry around, uses, or you can do all kinds of things with something like this. Why these are important is because honestly, most of our lives are not these gigantic challenges that require, well, maybe something like this. This is a 35-inch Gransfors Bruk American felling axe. I mean, look at the size difference from what we've jumped to. You see that? Isn't that crazy? How much bigger these things are and longer. You know, that is just wild. But what you're getting now is an honest-to-goodness type Paul Bunyan chop down a big hardwood tree. So do you need one of these? Most people don't. They might not even have the skill to operate it safely. But what you could use is, in your collection of tools, is something about like this. This you can take a tree down. It'll of course take longer, but it's a beautiful design, super sharp, nice solid head. If you need something, if you know what you're doing and you want to go a little bit bigger, you can go to something just slightly larger, you can see. But overall, this would be a decent axe, and it works as well as a hatchet. So you know, you might think, well, is it worth it, you know, to make that leap over, you know, what was, dig it out of here. You know, my Boy Scout type axe or hatchet. Is this worth it to make that leap? I think so, and it will teach you a little bit more about processing wood, working in the forest, and the further you can get away from that bit, probably a little bit safer you are. Whereas the people who might be thinking, oh, this is great, well, this is really close.